Hello. So we're talking about how you can avoid going to jail. Fantastic. We just talked about the fact that engineering ethics is messy. It's a complicated area. Okay? It's murky, to say the least, right? The ability for engineers to make good ethical decisions is a challenge under the best of circumstances. So the philosophers have been thinking about ethics for a really long time, specifically 2,300 years that we know of, right? And they've not really reached a solid conclusion in how we can make good ethical decisions every single time. So where does that leave us? Well, if we just leave it to ourselves, we'll all be making random decisions, and we can't do that. We need to come up with some sort of framework, some sort of guidance, a signpost at least, that can show us how we can make good ethical decisions when we find ourselves in a situation that calls upon us to make an ethical decision. Well, that certainly seems reasonable. We should have something, right? There's a lot of people in the world. There's a lot of people making ethical decisions. We think some people are making good ethical decisions every single day. Clearly, from reading the paper, there's a lot of people who are making poor ethical decisions. If we could figure out what the good people are using and copy them, then maybe as engineers, we could do what we do best. Apply their philosophy to our decision-making ability and make good ethical decisions every single time. Well, it sounds like a great thing to investigate. So let's take a look and see if we can figure out who can teach us how to make good ethical decisions. Well, an interesting question comes up right off the bat. Hey, we're engineers. Why should we even be bothered with this ethical decision stuff? Look, I sit in the cube. I work with numbers. There's no ethics going on here. Come on. Generally, people who go to jail that I read about deal with money. I'm an engineer. I'm not dealing with money. Valid point. I don't disagree with that. Except for that history thing. So let's talk about history. History has a nasty way of showing up and saying, hey, engineers, you do need to worry about ethics. Case in point, the Boston molasses disaster. In 1796, in Boston, there was a very large vat of molasses. And when I say big, I mean really big. This thing was 50 feet across, and it was 90 feet tall. It had the ability to hold over 2 million gallons of molasses. And the guy who built it, well, he cut some corners. He really didn't do that good of a job of building a vat. The thing leaked from day one. Now, if you were building a vat and you built it, what would you do right off the bat? Test it? I mean, before you put molasses in it, would you fill it with water and make sure that it worked? It seems reasonable. This guy didn't. So he built it. He put molasses in it right off the bat. And it started leaking molasses from day one. Clearly, he's got a problem on his hands. He needs to take some sort of action because he's got molasses pouring out the sides of this big vat that he has. Well, we got to give him at least a little bit of credit. He certainly did. He painted the vat brown so that people in Boston couldn't tell that it was leaking molasses constantly. All right, so this wasn't well designed. Well, he finally got it full. He had over 2 million gallons of molasses in it, in his poorly designed vat. Can you guess what happened next? You're right. It failed. A molasses vat with 2 million gallons of molasses in it blew open in the northern suburb of Boston. So molasses went racing through the streets at 35 miles an hour. 20 people were killed. 150 people were injured. People started saying, who designed that vat? Oh, it was an engineer. The Ashtabula River Railroad disaster was a bad story. Middle of the winter, 2 engines on a train go over a bridge. It's too much for the bridge. The engines and all the cars on the train plunge into the frozen river. There was 152 people on the train. 92 of the people die. Okay. Tragedy happens all the time. Clearly something went wrong there. There was an investigation afterwards. Guess what they discovered? That particular railroad bridge had been designed by the company's CEO. He disregarded all of the standard design procedures. Oh, but it gets better. That bridge hadn't been inspected in far too long. So whose fault was that? Engineers. All right, so back in the day, people started to not trust things that engineers made. These types of disasters were front-page stories for weeks. So engineers knew that they had a problem. They were losing the confidence of the people who bought and used their products. They had to do something, and so they had to take action. Good news for us, they did. What happened was actually two separate things. The engineering ethics problem was solved by applying two new things. First off, it was decided to license engineers. Hey, professional engineers, this is where it came from, okay? So in the US, this impacts basically independently operating engineers. Engineers who work in industry as part of a large firm, or engineers who work in education, or sometimes for the government, do not have to be licensed. However, if you strike out on your own, if you put a shingle outside, you'd better have a professional engineering license. And that's how people have some confidence that you have a basic level of knowledge that you know what you're doing. Now, something else that came about at about the same time was the professional societies that existed created their own code of ethics. And so there's a lot of them around. The National Society of Professional Engineers, as you well know, has their code of ethics. The American Society of Civil Engineers has created theirs. And the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the IEEE, has theirs. You know, I've read all of these ethical standards, and interesting enough, they're all pretty much the same. They say it a little differently, but they say things like, be honest, make sure you don't get influenced by others, don't cheat, don't steal, etc. You know, it's all the same sort of stuff, okay? So people started to have more confidence that engineers were guided both by a license that they could lose if they made poor decisions, and also by being a member of a professional society that gave them guidance and said, listen, all of our members are aware of our ethical creed, and all of our members have agreed to live by it. Fantastic. We had a problem, we created two solutions, bam, we're taken care of. The ethics problem has been solved, at least as it applies to engineers. Or has it? Let's think about this for just a moment. So the way we solved it was professional licensing, okay, and also making sure that professional societies had a code of ethics. Okay, I'm good with that. So let's say you're a young engineer. You're in college. Fantastic. You complete college. Ta-da! You pop out of college. Bing! What are you going to do? Odds are you're going to go work for a large firm. Fantastic. So do you need to become a licensed professional engineer? The answer is no. Uh-oh. So we missed that safety net. Okay, not a problem whatsoever. Remember, we still have professional societies and their code of ethics. So do young people join professional societies? The answer is no. Generally, joining a professional society is something that we don't wise up to. We don't realize that it's valuable until a little bit later in our career, if at all. I'm sure that you've taken a look at the statistics for most professional societies. Generally, they're only able to garner maybe about 6 or 8% of the people who are possibly eligible to join their society. Look, they do a fantastic job with their members. There's no question about that whatsoever. The problem is that there's a lot of engineers out there who are not licensed and who are not members of a professional society. What this means is that those folks have completely missed the two safety nets that were put in place to ensure that engineers got at least some guidance on how to make good ethical decisions. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a challenge. Perhaps we've not solved this issue. So let's talk for a moment about what I like to call the Darlene Druin problem. So Darlene was a very, very successful Air Force employee. She worked her way up in the organization. Apparently, Darlene was tough as nails. Nobody messed with Darlene. She reached a very high senior role in the Air Force's procurement division, which means she was responsible for buying things. Now, Darlene had a beautiful daughter and a lovely son-in-law, and they needed jobs. Not a problem. Go to Mom, and Mom can take care of you. Mom picked up the phone and called Boeing, one of the companies that she dealt with in her procurement job. And she said, my daughter and son-in-law need a job. You know what Boeing did? They gave both of them jobs. Okay, that seems a little squishy, but whatever, stuff happens. Well, Darlene was also responsible for the KC-767 tanker project. Now, here's the story, and in case you don't know, the way the Air Force works is they buy tankers, which are basically airplanes full of fuel. They fly around and the little jets come in behind them. They hook them up in the air, they dump some fuel in them, and the jets go off and do what they got to do. These gigantic tankers wear out, and so the Air Force needed to buy another 100 of them. Not a problem whatsoever. Darlene, in her role as a senior executive in the U.S. Air Force, was in charge of the contract to purchase the tankers. So they put out a contract to a whole bunch of vendors. Boeing was one of the vendors. Boeing proposed that the U.S. Air Force lease 100 KC-767 tankers for them at a cost of $370 million per tanker for a total value, contract value of $37 billion. Darlene selected Boeing as the winner of that particular bid. Fantastic, wonderful, case closed. Yeah. Darlene then quit the Air Force. She joined Boeing as a senior executive. Boeing paid her $200,000 a year and gave her a $50,000 joining bonus. You know, people started getting suspicious at this point in time. So they went back and looked at the KC-767 contract. It turns out that to buy a KC-767 tanker costs $150 million. The Air Force was leasing them, not buying them, leasing them for $370 million. Clearly, somebody had handed Boeing the best contract in the world. So Darlene ended up spending 9 months in jail. I think she got 2 years of community service, and she was fined like $1,500, basically disgraced. The CEO of Boeing had to give up his job, and there's other sorts of huge fallout from this. Darlene had an opportunity to make decisions, and she clearly made the wrong ethical decision. So what is ethics? Well, ethics refers to standards of behavior. We know this, okay? Should I do this or should I do this? It tells us how we should act. But remember, it's not just ethics at work. Of course not. It's ethics at work, ethics at home, ethics at school, ethics with friends, and so on and so on and so on. You know, standards of behavior is really, it's a decision-making process. So ethics is a slippery slope. How can I communicate that to you most clearly? Well, I'll tell you what. I've decided I want a new job. My job's going to be a good one. I'm going to work for a big company. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to the outside world. I'm going to go to all the vendors who do business with that company. And I'm going to make them a promise. I'm going to tell them if they give me money, I'll make sure that they get selected the next time they bid on a contract with this company. Do you think companies would be willing to pay me to do that? Oh yeah, they sure would. Well, okay, great. So I've decided to go into business for myself that way. In order to do that, I'm going to need to have people inside the company do what I tell them to do. Okay, and let's say you work for that company. Okay, I'm going to need to get you to change the way you make decisions. How can I make that happen? Well, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to be able to do it all at once. It's going to be a process. Here's what I'm going to do. Remember, ethics is a slippery slope. Friday night, I'm going to show up at your desk, and I'm going to have a bunch of designs. And I'm going to say, oh man, my boss is on my back because I'm way behind on these designs. Hey, look, you know, I know the company policies for me to give the designs for you and for you to spend a week reviewing them and then sign off on them. But if I don't get these to him tomorrow, it's going to be like my job. Is there any way? Look, I've double-checked these designs. I guarantee that these are just fine. And by the way, there's no safety issues. There's nothing in these designs that affect people or property or anything like that. They're silly, stupid designs. I'll tell you what. Could I ask that you just sign them off? It would mean so much to me. You would be saving my job. And man, I would owe you big time. All right. If I came and made that request to you, what would you do? Some of you would probably say, no, absolutely not. We will follow the company procedure. Yeah, okay, that's fine. There's some of you. All right, so you're off my list. But I tell you what, some of you are going to say yes. Cool. Now we're on a path. You're starting to go down that slippery slope. You slipped. How about that? So what's going to happen next? You're probably going to be in a situation where you're hiring people, or at least you're part of a panel or a committee that's hiring somebody. And I'm going to come to you and say, hey, I heard that you're involved in hiring some people. Hey, one of the people that you interviewed is my wife's sister's son. Okay, man, I can vouch for you. This kid's great. He's had some challenges in the past, but he got his act back together. He's rock solid. And look, he knows me, I know him. I will make sure that he does what he's got to do. I'm wondering if you could maybe, if you got to pick somebody, he should be as good as everybody else. If you're willing to pick him, I would be forever grateful to you. And it would make my wife's sister happy. And if that will make my wife happy. If my wife's happy, I'm happy. And this is huge for me. So if you're cool with this, if it doesn't mean that much to you, could you just select this guy, and then we'll all be happy about it? All right? I mean, you already signed off on my design. Maybe you can select this person for me. I appreciate you doing that. That's very kind of you. Got you twice. So where does this take us to? Bam! You're on a procurement committee. You're selecting which vendor the company's supposed to work with. Ding! I'm going to show up. I'm going to say, hey, look, I'm under the impression that you're on this procurement committee. You're worrying about who you should select. My impression, what I've heard back from other people is, look, all these vendors are pretty much the same. There's not that big of a difference between them. Is that, if that's correct, my brother-in-law works for these guys. Ugh, okay. So, I know they do good work. It's your call and stuff like that. But man, they're taking me out to the ball game over the weekend. Would you like to come along? If nothing, I'll give you a chance to meet them. You make whatever decision you want. Not a big deal. But come on with us. It's the playoffs. Come, they got like a box seat or something like that. It's like free food, free beer. Come on, let's go out. Let's hang out with them. We just have a good time and see where it goes. You're going to take me up on my offer? Oh, go ahead. What could possibly happen? If you do, I've got you. You're going to give them the nod. And after you've slipped this far down the slope, is it going to be that hard for you to keep slipping? Absolutely not. I can go back to those people that I said, listen, I can steer any contract that this company's doing your way. You just got to pay me, and guess what? They'll pay me, and I'll steer the contract. I've got a great side business going on here, and you're a critical part of it. Thank you so much. I appreciate you compromising your ethical decision-making for me. See how it can happen? You're not looking for it. You don't have any defenses against it, and it sneaks up in the form of me. So maybe you just shouldn't associate with me. Well, yeah, first off, that's correct. But there's a lot of me out there, so you've got to be careful. So, look, if we had some sort of rule book, something that we could follow that told us what's good and what's bad, then we wouldn't have to do so much thinking, would we? We could just look in the rule book and say, I've got an ethical decision to make. What does the rule book say? Bam! That's what I should do. All right? Let's see if we can find that rule book, right? So what's our first choice? Well, isn't ethics like feeling stuff? Shouldn't my gut tell me if something is right or wrong? Sure seems like that. I mean, right? Don't people just go, that's wrong. I'm not going to do it. Okay, that's fine. One possibility. How about religion? My goodness. There's a lot of religions out there. One of them has to be right? There's books and procedures and temples and churches and there's people who do nothing but religion for their occupation. They have got to have a set of rules. If we could figure out who has the right rules, we could follow it. I mean, I don't care what religion it is, and that's fantastic. We're solved. Okay, that is great. Well, okay, that's one possibility, but I'm not really that religious. Okay, not a problem whatsoever. How about if we just say being ethical is doing what the law requires? In this country, we've got 200 years of laws. You would think that they've worked everything out by now, right? So just look up what the law says in regards to the situation, follow the law. Hey, you're not going to jail, right? Everything's cool. You got it taken care of. Rock and roll. I guess the fourth option in this one is, look, sometimes laws are lagging or laws are a bit off or whatever. I'm not sure about religion, all this sort of stuff. Stop. I'm going to look at what society says. What are my neighbors saying? What are the people in my town saying? What do people in this country say? If all these people were whispering in my ear, what would they tell me to do? I'm going to do what society says is right. Rock and roll. That's fantastic. Well, these are good. I would like to caution you. There's companies out there, WorldCom, Enron, Anderson Consulting. They had access to all these things, and those companies are gone these days because of poor decision. Let's see if we can figure out if we can apply any of these sets of rules to where we're at. So let's talk about that gut feeling thing. Using our feelings, our gut, to make good ethical decisions. And it seems like we should be able to do this, right? Ethics and feelings are sort of the same things after all, right? You'd think so. But then, of course, there's the case of Jared Lee Loughner. Who's Jared? Well, okay. Jared's the crazy guy who a few years ago out in Arizona showed up at a political rally by Gabrielle Giffords and opened fire. He attempted to kill, if I recall correctly, 9 people. He killed like 6 people. He shot Representative Giffords in the head. She went to the hospital for a long time. I think she's back. She might even be still a representative. I can't remember. Why? What? No, I thought we had determined that shooting people was a bad thing to do. And the answer is yes. Shooting people is a very bad thing to do. However, Jared decided that women should not be in a position of power. And the fact that Representative Giffords had gotten herself elected was clearly an affront to society. But don't worry, Jared was going to fix that problem. He was going based on what his gut was telling him. Jared's just one crazy person. That doesn't spoil the mix. Granted. But then, of course, there's the case of Anders Breivik. Now, what's the story on him? Well, he's the guy that also a couple years ago decided it would be a great fun to set off a bomb in downtown Norway. Then he took a gun and he went out to an island where a group of students were gathered for a rally, and he walked around and he killed 69 people. So, okay. Oh, clearly it's wrong. There's no question about that. Why? Why did he do that? Okay. Anders had a philosophy of life. He had some things that he wanted to accomplish. Specifically, he wanted all Muslims to be removed from Europe. Okay? He had felt very, very strongly about this, but he had a problem. Nobody was paying any attention to him. Nobody was reading his manifesto. He felt obligated to do something to gain attention to himself so that his manifesto would be shared with everybody and they could see that clearly he was right. So he felt that the actions that he took would cause the outcomes that he wanted. Good news, Anders was completely wrong. In fact, Anders was crazy, okay? But he really, really, really believed in what he was doing. You and I look at him and go, man, you're just crazy, crazy dude. But he didn't see it that way. So both Jared and Anders probably thought they were making good ethical decisions, okay? The problem is that their feelings frequently deviate from what you and I would agree are good ethical decisions. So it's pretty clear that we can't rely on our feelings to make the right decisions when it comes to matters of ethics. Okay. What that means is we're going to have to find something else, right? What do we got going for us? How about religion? Religion, in most cases, has been around for a really long time. You know, people feel very, very strongly about their religion. And, good news, religion can also set a high ethical standard and define what correct behavior is. And, depending on the religion, they can provide some serious motivation to be a good person. Whatever the benefits are, if you're a good person, you get the benefits. If you're not a good person, you don't get the benefits. Pretty simple stuff. Well, okay, and I'm on board with that. I mean, in fact, if religion was the answer, we should all sign up for some religion, whatever religion you want. I'll tell you what, though, when I go home at night and I turn on the TV, it shows me stuff from the Middle East. It shows me people fighting very intensely. Good news, everybody's got a religion. Bad news, their religion seems to indicate that they should be doing what they're doing, but it seems to be against what these other people whose religion tells them they should do what they should do. And they don't seem to be seeing eye to eye. Apparently what we're missing, surprise, is one unifying religion that everybody can sign up to that tells us exactly what to do. Don't got that. So what it means is that we really can't confine our ethical decision making to any one particular religion. It can help, let there be no question. It can promise us some sort of fantastic reward if we're a good person. But I don't think it's going to give us the specifics, the details, the things that we need to understand on a day-to-day basis in order to make really, really good ethical decisions. Hey, still, subscribe is probably a very good thing and all that stuff like that, but you can't rely on it to help you make better ethical decisions. Well, so if gut isn't going to work for us, and religion isn't going to help us get to where we want to, what's left? Well, the law. Fantastic. Look, I live in a society, my actions are governed by the law. It sure seems like I should be able to go to the law and say, listen, what can I do and what can I do? And as long as I do that, I'll be making good ethical decisions. And you'd be along there pretty well. The problem is that laws sometimes don't keep up with us. Case in point, in the 1940s and 50s in the US South, the Jim Crow laws that said that blacks were equal but separate. Today we look at those and we go, no way! Those were horrible laws. Well, yeah, that's true. No question about that. But back in the day, it was the law. All right? What else is there? Well, you know, there was apartheid in South Africa. Once again, it was a division of people just because. You and I look at it and we go, well, that was clearly wrong. If you were living in South Africa, you saw the world through the laws. They governed your life. It wasn't wrong. It was just the way things were. So yes, the law can provide a good marker, a good guidepost. And by the way, if you break the law, you will go to jail. But we can't always rely on the law to help us get to where we're going to get. Should we do what society tells us to do? If I look around to what my peers and my friends and my family are doing, if I do what they do, am I going to be on the straight and narrow? I'd hope so, but that's not always the case. Germany in the 1940s went crazy. They did stupid, really bad things. If you looked at your neighbors and did what they did, you did stupid things. You know, in our modern times, we're faced with challenges that society hasn't made up its mind about. Abortion, we're split right down the middle on that one. Death penalty, yes and no. What's the right answer? Nobody knows. How about euthanasia? Oh my gosh. You know, there's a cocktail party for you, right? Let's come and talk about those topics. Those are incredibly diversive topics. We don't have a good answer for any of these. So look, you and I care deeply what everybody thinks about us. Even if you don't say it, you do actually care about it. However, the challenge that we're faced with is the fact that society doesn't always make really good decisions. Instead, what has to happen is we, as engineers, need to acknowledge that we are part of society. We need to acknowledge that our decisions will have an impact on society. There's no question about that whatsoever. However, we can't rely on the way society views the world to guide our ethical decisions, because there's a possibility that society might not have it right. All right, we can live with that. So here's a quick ethics case study for you. A job offer. So say you came out of school. It's a tight market. Well, it is a tight market. It's hard to find jobs. You apply to a whole bunch of companies. One company gets back to you and says, hey, here's a job. It's not the perfect job for you. But man, it's not clear that you're going to get any other jobs. So you go ahead and you accept it. Fine. End of story. That was a simple case study. Wait. There's more. Company B shows up. They present you with a job, and oh, this is the perfect job for you. Wait a minute, but you already accepted A. What do you do? Do you write to A and say, oh, I've changed my mind, and accept B? Do you write to B and say, oh, well, I already accepted with A, so I can't? What's the right thing to do here? More importantly, what's the ethical thing to do here? Would A care? I mean, there's an impact issue, right? Would B care? Would you care? What's best for you? I mean, you are part of the decision, right? This is the kind of messy situation that engineers can find themselves in. It's tricky stuff. So let's talk about ethics in you. So Hank Morris had arguably about the perfect job in the world. He was the fund manager for the New York State Pension Fund. So everybody in New York pays into the retirement funds. Hank was in charge of managing it. Cool job, fabulous job, well-paying job. Hank wasn't happy with that. Hank wanted more money. So Hank went out and talked to all the places where he could possibly put his money, all the different funds. He said, hey, I've got a lot of money. I will put my money in your fund if you give me money. Oh, and they did. They gave him a lot of money. And it was a really good business until he got caught, because that's illegal to do that. So Hank had an opportunity to make ethical decisions, and Hank made the wrong decisions. Identifying ethical standards is hard, and there's two reasons for that. Because the question for us as engineers is, number one, what should we base our ethical standards on? And number two, once we know what we should base our ethical standards on, how should we apply these ethical standards to specific real-life situations that we face? Seeing, hypothetical ethical situations is great, but I'll tell you what, those real-world ones are the ones that are going to show up and slap us around. And so that's the problem that we need to find a solution to.